welcome back to Cloudy with a Chance of Insights, the fortnightly podcast all around the Microsoft Cloud. Joining me, as always, are David and Cyrus. And this week we have a range of topics that we're going to be covering off. So David, you're going for Azure Virtual Network routing acceptance going into GA, Microsoft Zero Trust Assessment, which we have talked about on this pod before, but there's a video apparently that's been released talking about AI dev workflow, which I'll be really intrigued to hear about because I've not caught that one yet. And then you've got a migration story about moving from 1,000 apps under live load, plus some new research on Passkey weaknesses in Entra. And Cyrus, we have got, what have we got from you? We've got AI being used to help attackers target industrial control systems. US is now allowing private cybersecurity firms to take part in offensive cyber operations, which I can see working so well. And Microsoft have closed off a weakness in the passwordless journey, which I think I actually did see an article about that, but I haven't had the chance to read up on it yet. And for my piece, which I'm going to sort of tail end the episode with today, I'm going to talk about an experience I had with, and you can blame Cyrus for this because he suggested this based off a LinkedIn post, but an experience I had with an internal hackathon where I managed to place, I'm not quite sure entirely how, but I'll talk about the process, not what the submission, but the actual process that I went through actually to develop the solution that I submitted. But anyway, seeing as David was taking a well-earned break last week, I think we'll kick off with him. And I'm assuming the virtual network GA announcement.
No, you're absolutely wrong. But that's all good because I like to keep you on your toes, Richard. So, yes, as we've spoken about, we share our topics sort of moments before the thing starts, and we never quite tell each other. So it's awesome.
literally, I saw David's about 5 seconds before I hit the record button. So it was a quick transfer into my notes system to put the agenda in place. Although I will have to give Cyrus credit, he did actually get me his topics last night. Ooh. I just didn't look at them until this morning.
That's fine.
No, I jest, and as Richard said, this week I'm sort of spanning infrastructure development and security, and I think again I seem to do this a lot, don't I, Richard? But I sort of pull these disparate things and then sort of find a thread in and amongst them all. And we spend, dare I say, a considerable amount of time in technology trying to reduce complexity, or we should be trying reduce complexity, right? Maybe that's another conversation for another day. But we I think we've even spoken about it here. We abstract things, we automate them. We what else? We kind of wrap them in managed services. And most of the time, this is kind of the right direction. And you reduce that operational load. You sort of reduce the dare I say, the expertise requirement. The expertise requirements narrow, and we can look at systems and they become more, I guess, accessible without specialist knowledge, right? But under that, I think this is the thread that I'm pulling on, I think, which is when we remove the operational complexity, do we actually solve the underlying problem, or have we just moved the responsibility for it somewhere else? Just something to think on, right? And I think that's the thread that I'm pulling on from different angles this week. So hope you enjoy. Now, the first one is the new GA, as fairly sure it's GA. I'm sure I read it as GA. The the Azure Virtual Network Routing Appliance. That's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Azure Virtual Network Routing Appliance. And this is, as with most of the Azure names, fairly uninspiring in terms of a name, but the capability that lives underneath is super, super interesting. And I'm not sure how many of our audience have dealt with really large hub and spoke Azure networks. There's a fairly common underlying issue, right? And somewhere in that network, something or someone has to forward all the packets between the networks, right? And you can use NVAs from the many partners that provide them, whether they're firewalls, routing VMs, or you could even use various combinations of the Azure's networking stack, right, in terms of the stuff that's there today. But when you need sort of the significant east-west throughput, that forwarding layer itself becomes part of what you then have to size and scale and operate. And in the past, the only real choice, I think, were appliances, the Palo Altos and the others. And the VNRA is Microsoft's answer to that. So they're going to provide that element to the infrastructure as a managed service. Nice. I've not played with it yet, so it'd be interesting to see how it really does. Have either of you had an opportunity to play with it yet? No. So
no, not yet. Which is probably a good thing, quite frankly. But
but yeah, in a simple summary, I suppose, would be it's an appliance running on specialized networking hardware, and you deploy it into a dedicated virtual network appliance subnet, address, and throw traffic at it using UDRs. And the performance numbers they state are reasonably impressive, actually. So I think you can choose between 50, 100, or 200 gigabits per second of bandwidth. That's a fairly hefty chunk of traffic that you're pushing through it. And at the 200 gigabits tier, I think Microsoft quotes something like it's up to 1.5 million new connections per second and 8 million concurrent flows. So it's a pretty chunky bit of kit, right? That should be capable in most instances. I'm sure there's going to be edge cases, right? But it's a good addition. And you then get all the nice things like zone resilience and everything else because it's built on Microsoft's stack, right? They're providing it as a managed service, which is quite nice. And what else? It doesn't replace Azure root server. I don't know if you've played with that much either, but that is the thing that handles the control plane routing. So using BGP and things to exchange routes between Azure and the network virtual appliances. So VNRA sits in that data path and then packets traverse it. So it's important to know because you could have a hub where root server helps everything understand where the networks exist, right? So using BGP and all the other good stuff. And then VNRA provides the forwarding capability to move traffic between them at scale. So super interesting. And I going to be interested to see the take of it, right? Because you kind of the whole when you're talking about security, you've got the whole defense in depth thing. People have a tendency for different components for different bits of the infrastructure, don't they? So you see that a lot where well, I have to have a Cisco firewall because I've got a Palo Alto somewhere else, and it's going to be interesting to see the adoption of this and whether it will. How much it is likely to displace the existing technology stack. So could be interesting.
People seem to love their NVAs, don't they? So I wonder. It'll be probably used. I'm not going to comment, but yeah, I suspect that it's not going to make a massive inroads to your Palo kit, for example, Fortinet, or whoever else it might well be that you've got sat there.
Yeah, good, super. And I'm going to mention quickly for the people that are watching us on video and not just listening, you'll notice that my main camera isn't working, so I'm on my trusty Brio 4K webcam at the moment. So I've got no nice visual effects, and you can see my bike in the background and the Octocat just there.
Yeah. Oh, don't worry. They've been looking at my dodgy picture of New York and the guitars for the last year and a bit, so I'm sure they can.
Yeah, just about hiding most of the mess in my office, so it's all good.
Oh, I give up on that. I just give up.
Good. What was I going to talk about next? The zero trust assessment thing that you spoke about, and we have spoken about it before, but this was a new video that they published, which is how do they manage their development workflow as a team, which was super interesting. And I think one of the most interesting things was that this wasn't anything really to do with AI per se, but they are using Markdown extensively as the core tool for structuring and managing work, which is quite interesting. And the problem they were addressing, or they say they were addressing, I guess is a common one across many enterprise organizations. So got sort of work items that exist in one system, and then you got documentation in another, and you've got things like backlog management and things like Jira or Azure DevOps. You're reporting in Power BI, you've got code in GitHub, you've got meeting notes across, well, Lord knows where, right? And increasingly you find, and to be fair, it does a good job of it, but some sort of AI assistant attempting to make sense of all of that stuff, right? So Copilot's good, but it does become difficult, and that fragmentation isn't really a technology problem. It's, I think, a consequence of, dare I say, how enterprise software has evolved. And obviously, the more things you can sell, the better as companies go, right? In many instances. So what their solution does is collapse most of that information into Markdown files, which are stored in Git. And those aren't just random Markdown files. They use front matter to give sort of Markdown structured metadata. So a file will carry things like a status or owner, a priority, an area, other sort of fields defined in YAML. You can go look. You can watch the video yourself, and it runs through it. And then the sort of the human readable description underneath. And that's eerily similar to what I do with my website posts, the blog posts, right? You've got all this data up front, and then you've actually got a bunch of text, and you use the data to sort of organize it and list it and do all those things. So just occurred to me. Now this obviously is an interesting approach, because the file then serves multiple purposes. Human can read its documentation, it can version it, an AI agent can then reason over it. You can use automation to parse it, and how they're doing it is using a static state generator can then turn it into a dashboard, right, or filtered views and reports. And it's like they sort of something wonderfully backwards about that, because we spent decades building really complicated, sophisticated work management things, and here we are with just a Markdown file and a static website, and granted a bit of AI code to make it look and feel the way they want it to, but it sort of appealed to me. A slip of coffee. Go on.
I think we're so I've been having a conversation with a number of people at work about this recently, because I've talked about this ad nauseum, but IT is certainly cyclical in nature. I think we have an idea, then that idea is the big idea for a couple of years, then we swap and then we sort of regurgitate it, but with small little tweaks.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, the topic I'm going to talk about actually has some similarities to this, because I've actually started to dig out XML again, because I find XML is actually a really good language for providing that structured metadata for an agent to pass it. And some of the agents, I always get confused which one it is, but one of them, either Claude or ChatGPT, actually like XML possibly a little bit more than they like Markdown.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I've never got on with JSON. I know people will probably be aghast at that statement, but
prefer
I've
JSON.
never really liked JSON. I'd much rather sit there with some XML. I'm sorry. And I know you can do more in JSON, but I can't. So I'll stick with the old and trusted method. But I think that's really interesting. And I did, and that issue that you mentioned right at the start, and is something that I've certainly struggled with, is that I've got pockets of information everywhere, work information. Unfortunately, because of IBM's security policies, I can't do much about the stuff that sits in Teams and Outlook, because we block integration into those products. But GitHub, Jira, Azure DevOps, blah, 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 I can access all that data. So I actually have, and this started a little while ago, because somebody insisted on having a PowerPoint slide as a status update that I had to produce every week, and yet I was running the project in GitHub. So I had a backlog, I had issues, I had features, all that sort of stuff set up in GitHub, but this guy wanted a PowerPoint slide with status. So I just pointed a load of stuff at GitHub and said, right, create this PowerPoint slide based off the information that's in GitHub, and then that escalated, and now I've got a system that basically does all of that for me without having to worry about where a document is stored, whether it's in Box or whether it's in my local file system, wherever it is. I've just got pointers basically to all those different locations. But anyway, that was a slight digression whilst you were having your coffee.
Got to have a digression. So was I saying? So yeah, so we've spent decades building more and more complicated, sophisticated work management databases, and then we have all these AI agents arrive, and suddenly the most useful data format turns out to be a folder of well-structured text files, right? So, but I think there is an important sort of architectural point that sits under all of that. I think whilst we know LLMs consume text exceptionally well, we know Git controls text exceptionally well. We know developers already have, to be fair, pretty mature mechanisms for branching, reviewing and auditing stuff, right? So Markdown in this context becomes the interface between the humans, the software engineering processes, and the AI agents. And for me, I think that's more interesting than simply saying they've replaced Jira or whatever else, right? And you wouldn't necessarily do this for everything, of course, but for their team, and they sort of work in a fairly distinct bubble, I think it's fair to say. It took, I think, about 2 days to build this static website that has all this stuff in. So, and we've spoken before about the danger of, dare I say, vibe coding and the proliferation of these vibe coded tools in enterprises. But equally, I think simplifying is a good thing, right? So yeah, interesting one. Go watch the video. We'll have the link in there. But wherever I point, I'm sure it'll appear somewhere at some point.
Well, I might even decide to put it up there with.
Oh, well, there you are.
But I'm not sure that's actually the right thing to do. Anyway, yes, we'll figure that one out.
Right, let me dash on. So the other thing I was going to talk about was the Logic App team, and the tagline was changing 60,000 engines whilst they are running, which sounds fantastical, doesn't it? But so the Azure Logic Apps integration accounts had roughly 60,000 Azure Functions applications running on old V1 and V2 runtimes. and Microsoft needed to migrate those to V4. What happened to V3? But anyway, I probably should have looked into that. But the and indeed into V4 and the isolated worker model. So across every region, without asking customers to migrate anything and without stopping the service. And that's, you know, that's where sort of engineering approaches become sort of interesting in my mind. And you know, the typical approach would be, well, let's just build a new version, run a test suite, and start moving customers, right? And that sounds fine in principle, but as we know, when you do things at a hyperscale, it's never quite that more straightforward, is it? So what they actually did was created a matching V4 application alongside each existing application. So they essentially doubled the estate while they were doing this. The existing runtime continued to serve the customer, and then I'm going to dig into this. The new runtime received a copy of the real production request. Obviously, if they're using queues, they're sending to both, which is super interesting. Gives a bit of insight into how it all hangs together in the background, I suppose. But anyway, and then processed it as shadow traffic. And the result of that didn't go to the customer, but instead, Microsoft then compared the old and the new output. And you can imagine, right, at peak, they're comparing hundreds of millions of requests per week across sort of all the traffic that was flowing rather than just a sample. So they're looking at absolutely everything. And that's quite a substantial thing to do in production whilst everything's running, right? Super, super interesting. And, you know, I think probably the first time for a long time that I've come across shadow traffic as a live way of testing this stuff. And I don't know if you chaps have come across it recently, but I'm trying to remember if ever in my career that I've actually, other than sort of routing and port mirroring, you know, but you used to use that for troubleshooting, right? Well, what's happening on this port? Well, I'll put it on this other port so I can monitor what's going on. Not, can I shove it out of that into a duplicate thing and then see what happens? And I think that opens up quite a lot of interesting propositions, right? Because I've never really thought about that architecture in that sense. So I thought that was super interesting. And then once they got to a point where parity was sufficiently strong, right, they then started moving the traffic over using a region by region method, right? And then rollback was just pointing them back to the thing that's already working, as opposed to having to roll back a bunch of configuration, which again is quite an interesting approach. You know, they were in the fortunate position to be able to sort of change the control plane config, and you know, people would be back on the old thing. So and back on the old thing within minutes. And you know, I think yeah, the migration as a word, you know, makes you think of, okay, well, a cut over, and you know, do we see like nice dashboards, and then is everything green, right? And then let's go and delete everything. So I thought that was a super interesting. It wasn't quick, so it took them about 2 years, I think. So 1 year proving parity, and then another sort of shifting the production traffic and sort of retiring the old estate. So I thought that was really interesting. And it's not really the underpinning thing there for me isn't necessarily just about functions, right? But it's how do you think about different ways to modernize the infrastructure that you genuinely can't switch off whilst it's running? And that's super interesting for me because, you know, folk may know I've changed roles recently. So I'm working at Heathrow, and there's a lot of stuff there that you can't turn off. Quite a lot of stuff. So you know, and like I say, I think it's something that I'll probably take away and maybe see what the application is there in my context. Right, I'm gonna have another slip of coffee.
Yes, it's an. Yeah, I was going to go off on another tangent then, but I'm not going to. I'll save that for later on. But it's nice to see a migration happen smoothly, or at least externally appear to have happened smoothly. I'm sure it probably did.
I'm sure there were challenges, for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure there was. But yes, it's nice to see something happen.
Yeah.
You know, a 2-year migration, that's a nice cushy job for someone to be to be working on.
Right, I've got like 2 of the things that I'm going to belt through because I realised I've taken most of the time. So the security stuff. So there's two security things. Now there was a chap called Michael Raft, maybe. I apologise if I butchered your name and you hear this. And he presented some research at Black Hat, which was called Pass the Passkey. And this is a video, and it was on Meryl's, one of our favourite people in the world, Meryl's podcast. And I'm going to super summarise it now, and you can go and look at it. But essentially, this chap has crafted a new browser, inverted commas, and then the exploit was, I've gained access to somebody's machine, I've gone into the event log, I've identified that there is an event log entry that essentially has the passkey assertion in it. He copied the contents of that event log entry, pasted it into the browser, and you logged in as the person.
Yep.
Probably the fastest, and Meryl says this, the fastest he's ever seen anyone log into Entra in his life.
Yes.
Tell me about
it. And you know, it's only for a limited period, right? So it only works in the scenarios where the machine's compromised and you know somebody's actively looking at it. But wow, super interesting, and there's a bunch of stuff there. So go and read that. And then the other thing that I was going to talk about, there's a SCCM, and people do still use SCCM. Would you believe it? It is. It is.
Yes, they do.
And it was again something which allowed a network attacker to elevate privilege, and this was by Omri Basso. Probably butchered the mess. And he had a proof concept which changed the access control weaknesses, which involve tab abstraction, path traversal, certificate validation, and DLL loading to actually get to system level execution on a config manager primary site server. Again, quite important, because the primary site servers, what can they have privilege to do? Pretty much anything they want, because they're pushing stuff to machines. So again, super interesting. So go, you know, the vulnerability's been patched, but again, you know, I think 2503 and 2509. So just please go check that you're patched. I know it's on premises. I know it's config manager. I know you probably got a lovely moat around your network, but please just check.
Always worth double checking.
Yeah.
Even if you think you're secure.
That's the time for the passkey bypass. The horrible time is 10 minutes. It's just insane. I was expecting that someone would discover a way to just show how it's maybe not well implemented, or it talked about passkey being a password for 10 minutes, literally, as you said, David. The way it's easy to use, because it's a proof of concept that now it can be reused, it can be tested, it's actually very scary. I didn't expect that. We just pushed the 5.2 to be simple with passkeys for Microsoft, for Google, etc. And now we're already thinking of either post passkey or how to maybe change the standard, how to encrypt the passkey itself. It's just like it's a constant race, and that was the best image of that.
You always have to be keeping one step ahead of people that are trying to do the opposite, in effect, for security. It's one of the reasons why it was a very interesting topic. But joys. Anyway, I'm going to change the order because I was going to let Cyrus go next, but because my piece is very quick, I thought I would actually just get that inserted in here, and then we will leave Cyrus the space to run through his 3 topics, because I've only really got one this week, and again, you can blame Cyrus for this one, but within IBM, every year we run something called the What's the Next Challenge, which is basically just a company-wide hackathon, primarily aimed at obviously using the IBM tool stack. So in this instance, it's IBM Bob, which we know Cyrus loves, and something called ICA, which is IBM Consultant Advantage, which I always struggle to actually define what that really is. But if you think about what M365 Copilot is, it's sort of it's IBM's equivalent of that, for want of a better description. Now, I've been back at IBM for 5 years, and I actually haven't competed, in inverted commas, in this because I'm not really much of a team player, and I could never be organised enough to go and sort of sort these things out anyway. I don't know whether any of you guys that competed or entered when you were around. I seem to remember that Richard Stokes did, but I'm not entirely sure on that. But anyway, at the last minute, I decided that why not? I'm going to give this a go. Now, the solution that I sort of spec together is not really that important, in my opinion. What I found was interesting is that I was able to work effectively with the AI tools that were available to us for part of the challenge, such that I was in a position to submit something that at least scored well with the judges, because I, out of 12,000 entrants across the IBM, across 4 different pieces, I finished second, which again is not that important. So how did I come in? And I do have an advantage because obviously my job now is working with these types of systems. Now, not necessarily the IBM ones, but the Microsoft ones, but the core concepts are almost the same. So what I've set up on my side, and this actually comes back a little bit, David, to what you were saying earlier on about how Markdown is now becoming really, really important. Because basically my whole life these days is in Markdown. Almost everything is now in Markdown in some form or other, regardless. But I've basically created, I've called it the sounding board in M365 Copilot, which I then converted to ICA for this. And the idea for that is it's step 1 of a multi-step process that I've developed, in inverted commas, to help me with this. And that is a more of like a critical agent where I can sort of give it some ideas and it will challenge me on whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, or what the pitfalls might well be, whether there's somebody else in IBM perhaps that's working on it, blah, 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 blah. So that's always the first step. So I run something past through that agent. And in this instance, I had about 3 different ideas. And over the course of probably about an hour, 2 hours, we discounted 2 of them and settled on the final idea. I then have basically another 2 agents already set up, again, which, all transparency, were originally set up in M365 Copilot, but I rewrote them for ICA for this experiment, which basically goes and takes that idea and puts it into like a high-level design template in Markdown. So what the premise is, what the technology stack might well be, what the constraints are, what the sort of end goal is, some user stories in there, some multiple potential user stories in there. And I then take that and I put that into another agent, which decomposes that into individual components or features or user stories or whatever it might well, whatever term you want to use for that. And only then do I go anywhere near any of the code in the systems? Because I know that both GitHub Copilot, Claude, IBM Bob has a plan feature. I very, very rarely use it for that part of the sort of cycle. So it's only once I've got that sort of decomposed items, now you can call them issues, features, whatever it might well be, do I then send that to the planning agent?
Yeah.
The planning agent then goes and does its wonderful thing, and then that then goes into Bob to actually do the build. And one of the things that came up from this process was actually that bit works relatively well. And obviously the smaller sort of units of work you can give the agent, the better in a way that it is able to understand what you need to do and to actually train them together in some sort of logical format. Now, I have written a UI over the top of this, which actually looks a little bit like a massive Kanban board, but I sometimes use it and sometimes I don't use the UI because it's actually that underlying process that's the interesting thing. And then what would happen out the back of that is each individual sort of task, subtask, whatever, has things like acceptance criteria, tests in it, etc. So in effect, you should, again, in inverted commas, get a fairly reliable result out of the back of it, depending on what you're trying to achieve. And then it's just a feedback loop. So I then will go through, do some testing. I'll make some manual observations around that. I'll use the sort of screen capture to post back into, in this instance, ICA to say, look, this is what the UI looks like. This is how it's going through from one to another. But I don't quite like it. I need this bit, this bit, this bit to do something different. Regenerates the sort of product spec, for want of a better word. Then we put it through the same process and then back into IBM Bob. And then that process works sort of iteratively over the course of that particular demo cycle. And what I found is that certainly within the normal work, for doing things like really fast prototyping, this process seems to work really, really well. I still wouldn't put it anywhere near a production environment, but that at a very sort of high level. Oh, and we've lost David. Is how I'm sort of going through that particular cycle. So anyway, that is being led on to something that I'm looking at for a slightly wider piece, which is being able to do the same thing, but actually create a demo out of the back of it automatically end to end. But anybody's interested in at least the first idea sounding board prompt, that is actually on my blog site, and you can go and have a look at it from there. But otherwise, I'm hoping that we haven't completely lost Mr. Rowley.
He's here.
But I will pass it across to Cyrus now to go through his topics.
Thank you, Richard. Really interesting. And indeed, I was asking you the workflows, the ideas behind your second place. And you have to remind also IBM is like more than 250,000 employees. So it's kind of impressive. Although there's less people doing the challenge, but it's still interesting to see the mindset and what you did. You made me smile with saying like my life is in Markdown. I was even thinking people in the future will have their will in the Markdown all their life in the Markdown.
It's become so common for everything, and it is a good format. As I said, I've started to actually try and experiment, as I said earlier on, with XML, because that gives me the ability to actually put some properties and have a lot more structure around it. And I think that's the next evolution of this, especially if I want to get to a position where I go from spec, or well, basically idea through to spec to tasks to development, automatically in effect to give a demo at the end of it. That's the goal, but I'm not sure that we're mature enough to actually fully get that yet. But it's in progress. I've actually got the project open at the moment on my screen. We'll see what happens with that one.
Yeah, that's an interesting time. Especially, I digress a bit, but I learned SQL when I was in school because I love the kind of like being above the coding language. I wanted something more close to English, something closer like I'm asking something, I have a result. Now we are in proper language, a bit like Star Trek. So it's more interesting even for the future. If someone wants to take over a project, instead of trying to read the documentation that is never created by developers, now you have proper text that human and machine can understand. So it's just bridging the gap. I mean, it's a completely digression and maybe a different subject.
It is, and there was a. So we are digressing, I
Yeah.
know, but there's a big thing, and it came up with GitHub the other day. And again, I think I've got a blog post. In fact, I know I've got a blog post on this, which is there was a recent update to GitHub Copilot around how it's doing things like pull requests and some of the documentation around that, and it's to try and sort of make it a little bit more concise. There is a big thing at the moment, and I've seen it internally, where someone will just say to an AI agent, go and document this or something, and you just get this massive long markdown file out of the back of it, which is probably entirely accurate and it's got everything that you might want to need about it. But from a human perspective, it's like, I'm not going to read that document. I need it to be much more concise. Yeah. And I see that even with sort of everyday M365 Copilot type sort of chats, is that the responses tend to be ridiculously verbose. And even though I've been very careful in setting up Copilot using the instructions file, same with Claude, to tell it how to respond to me and how to work with me, which by the way, anybody listening, I would recommend that's one of the first things that you go and do with any of these agents, is actually go and set that first step up. It still has a tendency to basically have verbal diarrhea and just give me way too much information, or I'm trying to think of the right English word for this, but almost like context. It tries to explain why it's saying something in the text that it's responding to, and you just need to get rid of some of that fluff. So again, I now have an agent that does something, then another agent that basically goes through and then tries to trim all the rubbish out of it, because I found that if I was doing it in one agent, it just wasn't able to do it. So I actually have to have like a chain of thought that goes through all of them.
Yeah.
But anyway,
you have an agent that peer review each other, and that's a good advice actually. I by laziness, I always jump on a project and I forget to do that. I do that after I'm telling off the things. It's still backwards. That's why I was asking your workflow, because it's more mature than what I think to do. So I need to.
And one of the good things about IBM, and I know I'm going off now on hey, IBM is brilliant, and I did rejoin IBM, so there's obviously got to be something good about IBM. But we have access to all the different tools. If I want to use Copilot, I can use Copilot. We've just recently signed an agreement with both Anthropic and OpenAI, so I can use Claude, I can use OpenAI models, I can use the IBM models. Basically, we're open to anything, so we can look and see which either model or harness or interface works better or gives us those results. And if I do have a scenario at the moment where I do something in Claude, then I run it through Copilot as well, because I find that Claude has got a slightly better, perhaps a broader response that might capture more points and might be slightly more interesting, but the format that it's come out in is just still a little bit too verbose. So I put it into GitHub Copilot and I tell that then to shorten it down and just give me the salient points. So I'm sure there's probably a way of doing that in one step, but so far, even with all the skills and the pieces I put into it, it still tends to do that, so that I end up with that workflow, which is a bit weird.
You'll have to share a screen one day, honestly, because I'm more and more interested. And every time you speak about those things, I'm like, I'm doing something wrong. It's backwards. It's 2024, so I have to.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I was reticent to do this, because it sounds a little bit like I'm saying, oh yes, I did all this on my own and I came second. It's amazing. It's not really about that, but I did something in effect that took me 2 days of work.
Okay.
Whilst I was multitasking, to produce a process which I already had, but I just had to re-platform it, and then produce the demo and the supporting collateral to do the submission. And that's entirely down to the process that I've put together. It's not about the technology. It's not about how I'm doing things. It's not about how clever I am. It's just that process that goes through and runs through from one end to the other.
Good.
Anyway, I might actually edit some of this and cut some of that out.
No.
we'll see how that goes.
No. Okay. So for my subjects, it's a weird story. I was randomly browsing, and don't ask me why. It's very weird, but I was doing it. I was sometimes, like when I'm like with you, Richard, when someone speaks to me and say, "Oh, we need this, we need that for a project," and I question myself a lot. I'm like, okay, why I'm such ignorant on what the person said. It can be a word, it can be a concept, it can be a framework, and weird enough, it's maybe an autistic thing, but I go and I need to go to the roots of whatever it is. If it's a concept, if it's a framework, I go. So that was a Caesar. I wanted to go to NIST, to Caesar, and I needed to go directly to the source to see if it's true. There's a SP 800 in NIST. We need a lot for security and organization, remediation, incident management, Caesars. So I was looking into those, and by browsing, I get caught in a rabbit hole, and I went to the Caesar website to relearn what's a CVE, etc. I know what it is, but I wanted to see what's new, if there's a new framework, to be at the state of the art. And by browsing, so this is one of the documentation I was printing. So in IBM, in every company, you can print your stuff. The one of the Caesar framework, and there was a random line that was completely out of subject, and that random line was talking about US agency are warning about ongoing activity targeting Siemens SC S7 PLCs. And I said, okay, interesting. So I opened it, and I could not digress more. Like, this is a different subject, but I was intrigued why it came to multiple of the Caesar page. Oh, it must be important, but didn't give more attention. And the next morning, weirdly, because like you, I follow Bleeping Computers, and Bleeping Computers made an article about this. I said, oh, I remember. I'm sure they talk about that Caesar thing. And Bleeping Computers was actually talking about the same story. And so, first of all, what's a PLC? So because we work if you work in defense, in energy industry, that's obvious. But what's a PLC for the audience? It's basically a small industrial computer. So imagine a tiny brain telling what a pump, when to start, a factory machine when to stop, or equipment how hard or how fast it should run. So it basically control like a proper industrial thing. I give you the worst case scenario. For example, if you went to Switzerland and you see like this, there's a village and there like I forgot, a dam. What do you call that? It's like a barrage, and there's a lot of water, and then you have like it generates energy, hydroelectric energy, and everything is controlled by PLCs. So I let you imagine what happened if someone controlled the PLC, and you can say, you know what, open the valve, all the water go, and the village is basically the Atlantic. It's erased completely. That's very dangerous. So imagine now attackers are using AI to help Python scripts to actually communicate directly with these CMS controllers. So countless time, we talked about security in depth, and how you increase the ROI of an attacker to discourage them to say, okay, this path is completely blocked. You will waste your money. Just try to find a leaked account and just attack them. And I have a side story for you that in that direction. But now the ROI completely changed. What we thought was now a defense doesn't exist anymore, because now you have AI attackers, and it's targeting now directly those machines, which is surprising because normally they shouldn't be exposed to internet, but some of them are for different reasons. So they are scanning the internet, as I said, for exposed devices, all software, and weak authentication. And the script can read and write PLC memory, configuration, and industrial logic. If you worked like with these kind of big groups, industrial groups, you know that those are old language, old like sometimes gibberish methods to communicate with those PLCs. It's very complex, and the activity currently looks heavily focused on reconnaissance and persistence, which can prepare for ground for the future disruption. And that sounds to me more like it's not a false alarm, it's the opposite. It's like more state agencies. So it can be, you know, Iran, China, Russia. This is important because it sounds like I'm smiling, but it's actually scary. We all live like near like water pumps or like sewage system. You block, you have no more shower. It's very nasty. If you open the rabbit hole, it's very nasty what can happen. So as I said, AI has made creating attack tools cheaper and faster, but I didn't expect that. I'm going to give you actually some recommendation. If you work in that field and you just hear that for the first time, there's already some patches for the CMZ7. So patch it, keep it away from the public internet. 90% of the risk is gone with that. Separate industrial networks from normal IT. David just before talked about segregation. It's still a powerful mitigation. And again, it's creating complexity. Again, that's the reason why sometimes we create complexity. We don't have choice. And monitor chance to the control itself. In my experience, I've seen a lot of like industrial stuff being like monitored lightly with OTs, so operational technologies, and it's still not secure by default. It's still assumed to be safe because it's in an offline network, but we've seen what can happen. Before jumping in the next story, what happened recently, why I was also digressing those things is in France, you probably heard, France now is the second country in the world to be the most cyber attacked. France is under massive attack, and basically the worst case scenario happened 3 days ago, is DGFiP, so it's a Direction Générale des Finances Publiques, so it's like the HMRC of France, was completely all the data of the people were leaked. So I say all 700,000 people's tax declaration and secret message were leaked by 2 young individuals, French-speaking individuals. It's not state agencies yet. It's just young trolls who made fun of the French agencies and publicly said, look, we've sold 700,000 of those. And what's weird is that the French agencies didn't really reveal that attack. Those 2 hackers had to reveal it, that it became a national crisis. And the worst is not that, is that the government seems completely shocked because they started to create a task force, but the task force is just bypassing the national agencies. Like the equivalent of England is like a NCSC. In France, we have the ANSSI. So they completely try to recreate the wheel, and the ANSSI was like, dude, what the hell? we exist for that. We have processes. What are you doing? So they're completely headless chicken. And it's very dangerous because now when you have like the tax information, it's not just like tax information and we know who is rich, who is poor. And now you'll see in a lot of new wave of robbery, but you have personal addresses. You have old people retirement with personal codes, and it's a catastrophe. And again, 2 individuals, and what they did is they bought at 50p to €5 leaked account from those admins from the like equivalent of HMRC, and then you wonder why there was no MFA, why there was no like a secure network, etc. So yeah, you will hear a lot about those. So again, that's all linked. We talk about industrial stuff, but it's linked. There's like AI used as an attack, and we are still questioning in the government if we should use AI or not to defend ourselves. It's just like, so sorry, not to digress, we move on to the next subject quickly. On August 12th, the White House issued a presidential, I have a problem with that word, memorandum that creates a program where approved private security companies can participate in offensive cyber operations against foreign criminal organizations. And I love that. I love your comment, Richard. And yes, it's actually scary what can happen. But yeah, think of ransomware gangs, fraud networks, things I thought about, like youth, script kiddos, phishing operations, and even sextortion groups, because that's what they do usually. Like a lot of the corrupted case in governments, they were all, not all, I shouldn't say all, but 90% of what I've read, it was sextortion. You did that, a bit like Epstein file. It's a bit like very interesting. So simple analogy of this is, until now, the private security company mainly helped, they helped you lock your house and told the police who attacked you. And then you were stuck. And my naive brain, when I was learning red teaming, when I was very young and I just joined this bank, when we were on the offensive side, I was thinking, okay, we have them, we know where they are, let's attack them. This is what we do as offensive, as offensive teaming. And this is how they recruited me. They said, yeah, you will do this and that. I said, hold on. Are you stupid? If you do any of the attack, and they will know that it comes from the bank, they just attacked you, they will be the victim, and you lost. And my naive world collapsed. So now it's like a childhood dream. Sorry, it's a bit extreme to say that become true. Now these companies, I mean, it's not that green, and it's not exactly that. So under this program, some vetted companies, so it's not everyone, could also help the government go after the criminal infrastructure itself. That could mean gathering intelligence, disrupting servers, so you can attack, or helping disable the system criminal use. So it's a gray area, so you can attack, and you can really use everything in your power to say, this server, no matter if it's like a real infrastructure or if it's someone's house, you potentially could attack back that IP. But like the government stays, so the program stays under the US government direction. Companies need vetting and contract, as I said, and the Department of Justice and Department of Homeland Security oversee it. Participants also need at least a $1 million bound of escrow with strict rules around what they are allowed to touch. But from what I read, it can be really broad. And so this is a major change in policy of what you can do. The opportunity is speed. Private cybersecurity companies often understand ransomware infrastructure before governments do. And you remember what I said about the French government. I remember myself being in one of these kind of round table with my company in France. And the discussion was MFA. And we all shared how cheap it is to implement MFA. How even a simple SMS, despite being like really shit, it's really like easy to replicate. You can be in the man in the middle with the antennas and replicate the SMS. I know, but again, we talk about security in depth. And the response from the government was too complex, no needed, we will be careful. You see? So that's the mindset of some government. France is the sixth most powerful country in the world. And this is the way they think. And I know they're not alone. So that's a very intelligent move for me from the US. Yet we know, as you said, Richard, it can be really, it can actually escalate. It's necessary to let companies or cybersecurity group to be more independent, to say, you know what, we're going to respond. But if the governments follow, it's fine. If not, it can escalate in a really nasty way. Like it can escalate war. It can exacerbate diplomatic relation. I mean, yeah.
I'm gonna keep my digression incredibly short because I'm conscious that we are running probably way over the normal time that we have set aside for this. But this does remind me of, with my dodgy English history lessons, of the sort of privateering age in the sort of Elizabethan piece, where we basically gave free rein to what they call privateers, corsairs, whatever you want to call them, but basically pirates that would go and raid the Spanish treasure fleets to impact both the Spanish economy but also enrich the UK economy. And it was basically given like turned a blind eye to the activities of some of these people in order to do that. And it does sort of remind me that we're doing the sort of same thing. Is that you guys can go and do whatever you want to over here. We're not going to pay too much attention. But it does open up the risk that it's going to become escalated and it's going to go anywhere.
I love the analogy.
Enough diversions.
No, it's honestly the best analogy. I had it not in mind. That's true. That's almost this, and because it's virtual, but yeah, we need an analogy to that for to understand. I see the time. My last news was about Entra, but I think that we kind of discussed that before. It was just like that. You basically you don't need. So, and I'll just do it really in short. It's fixed. It's Microsoft fixing the strangest problems in passwordless authentication. Imagine telling somebody, we want you to stop using the weak authentication, right? But first, you must register weak authentication so that you can register the strong one. So that's what we were doing. And David, you were talking fairly about Meryl, and Meryl spent a lot of time on that too. It's just a funny process when you have a new person onboarding. They have to use a password only. Then you have to register MFA eventually, something like a tapped temporary access password before registering password resistant. So some tenants have seen that changing already. We discussed that in the past. So now the date is from mid-October 2026. The first phase will let eligible password-only users register a sync passkeys, an Entra passkeys on Windows, or a FIDO2 equivalent security key as their first MFA method. Then it become in the future Windows 11 for Business, macOS platform SSO, and authenticator passwordless signing for the rest one. And I tried myself recently on my own account on my student. I still have access to my student university account. I lost my phone where the authenticator was. I had to recreate one, and by just re-enabling the on authenticator, I saw that directly for me it created a passkey. It didn't even ask more. It said, yeah, you can create a passkey directly. So it's very interesting. I wanted to share that news. But yeah, on my side, I'm done.
Excellent. Thank you, Cyrus. Your last point, and I know it's not quite what you were saying, but I was looking at smart door locks the other day. And there was one that came up saying, yes, it will unlock when you get near. And it didn't say what the technology was, but I'm assuming it was some sort of NFC or possibly facial, I don't know, but something. I was thinking that is not going to work. That is going to be same. So easy to bypass. I mean,
yeah, exactly. The dolphin. Oh my god.
Yeah. So anyway, never mind. But thank you very much for joining us this week. Those watching on YouTube, you'll notice I'm not sure how I'm going to manage this one yet, but David might disappear for some, be replaced by some avatar because we had some technical issues on the video feed. Those on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc., probably won't notice any difference. But thank you for joining us. As always, I leave this right to the last minute. If you're still with us now, please drop a like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, whatever it might be from the platform that you're consuming this from. And it's just left for me to say thank you and goodbye, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.